be an onerous task to do.
Yeah, there was
How far it goes, I don't know.
Yeah, the North Carolina chapter of the American Planning Association a couple of weeks ago submitted an update of just different items related kind of to the planning area, and it was, how many pages?
It was a lot.
Probably 5 pages, with just a brief snapshot of the different legislation out. The number of bills was unbelievable, so I don't know how many of them have passed through crossover. But at the next meeting, I can try to provide an update of kind of what looks like it's still alive in the legislature.
Tell Dave Owens to get on the job over there.
Yeah.
Another part of that same bill was that if you had a hog farm, for example, I don't know if we have any in Chatham County, but there are other hog farms, just one example of a lot of things. But if it was in existence before 2008, and a lot of them had to close because of environmental questions. If they were in business prior to 2008, this bill will allow them to go back into business without further delay. That is another real whammy, you know, that I don't know what we have in this county that would fall into that category. But you know, hog farmers are one that they zero in on, but there are other activities as well.
And there was a bill to remove ETJs from all municipalities. I don't know if that passed through crossover. I mean, there's
I don't think that got through.
they're related to,
I was wondering about that one too.
yeah, there's a number of, I'll try to provide you an update at the next meeting.
But anyway, it's something that we ought to keep on the radar.
Yeah, several of us actually, the Association of County Commissioners have agreed to be on, I think, a rapid response for different topic areas. So if they're planning items, then we'll receive those. And I know we've received one already. And then Dan's also one a group that receives information and provides feedback on environmental issues. So we're getting items.
All right. Next item is the Land Use Subcommittee update and report. And someone, and y'all may remember, at the last meeting, we received the final report from that subcommittee. They were then thanked and dissolved of their any further responsibility as an official subcommittee. And we said at that meeting that we wanted to make sure that other departments in the county had time to comment on the document, that we had time to read it and digest it and so on, and that we would tend to it at tonight's meeting. So this is tonight's meeting. I believe Jim had made a motion. Well, his motion failed. You want to make another motion?
Motion, we send this on to the commission.
Is there a second? Second from Bill Earl. I call your attention to, there is a list of comments from other departments.
Yep, is Hillary or Jason going to report on that?
Yeah, I got kind of wrong with that.
Do you want me to go over the comments that we received today from the different departments? Okay, so if I can get your attention to the first page, please, of the subcommittee update. We did reflect the comments from our last subcommittee meeting, and we had highlighted those changes in yellow in your report, so you can just kind of track along. The summary of those changes are here, and I won't go into detail because we discussed them at the last meeting. We did have an opportunity to reach out to our departments. We've not finished collecting all the input from the departments, but do not imagine a big change in the scope. I'll make a quick summary of who we've heard from so far and where we are with those comments. And the intention is if we are to recommend, the board is to recommend approval, sending this out to the Board of Commissioners, who would just finalize the comments before that time. So just a quick summary. We heard from the Sheriff's Office, Emergency Operations, the libraries, Information Technology, and Central Permitting in the respect that they'd like to sit down with us and develop the information a little bit further. I can kind of touch on what's been developed since this report was produced. But we did get some specific comments from public health. We're actually meeting with them this Thursday. They asked that we expand public health considerations on page 2 to include the entire public, including vulnerable populations. We had a descriptor, and they've broaden the descriptor to include all populations. And also to look at mobility, obesity, health impacts, and potential policies, projects. He also would like to call attention to coordinating with the Chatham County Schools and citing in regards to public health considerations and access and populations. So that was the summary of their comments we've received so far. The manager's office, we had worked with the assistant manager who, as you know, prepares the budget and the capital improvement plan for the county, Renee Pascal, and we had come up with the concept of a fiscal impact analysis of the plan itself. And just a quick summary, that this would be an additional scope component that would just give the fiscal impact of the plan. Since we're looking at a 25-year plan, it'll include population changes, population growth, just kind of a picture 25 years down the road of what our community envisions. And to that degree, we'd like to get a handle on what that means for the county in terms of staffing or space or thresholds for additional officers that would be needed here in the county, so on and so forth. So the intention is to kind of fold some of these different departments into that scope to say, hey, we'll need X amount of libraries, we'll need X amount of officers or detention space at the jail at certain population thresholds. And that component will be worked primarily with staff with Renee to develop it, so it's not a major change to the scope. The, let's see here, the Council on Aging did provide a wealth of information, and we're looking to meet with them to discuss it further. They did provide a strategic initiative and a lot of countywide population data that will prove to be very helpful as we go forward in the plan. We will sit down with them and develop this further. The sense of the production of this report, we did have an opportunity to speak with the sheriff, and we did so today, and he, as we talked about the fiscal impact, he reiterated that it would be helpful for his planning and for the county's planning sake to kind of take a look at those population thresholds, as I had imagined, as I spoke about rather, in regards to, again, the staffing of the sheriff's office, detention space, and the impact and the coordination between municipalities. We are still working with the finance department to make sure that our compliance with the procurement laws and methodology is appropriate. We do have a meeting arranged with them just to finalize that. We don't have any major comments in the back of the RFP where the procurement policies are. I think that pretty much does it. We did speak with the library today, and Ms. Clark did say that it would, again, the thresholds of the population, at what time do we need libraries in terms of the growing community that we have here would be helpful for them in county budgeting. So with that, I think that's the summary to date. We still have not touched base or heard directly from some departments. That includes DSS, a few other departments. Again, we're at a point where we think a lot of these pieces can be folded under the fiscal impacts. We've really covered the majority of the ground in terms of land use, in terms of the comments that we received from the last subcommittee meeting, emerging heavy industries, et cetera. So we feel as though we're in a comfortable spot to just kind of capture the rest of the comments and include it into the scope. So do you have any further questions before I add anything else to our RFP?
Any questions, Eldridge?
I do. One thing, a comment, we don't want to get too inward thinking, like how many prison cells do we need? That is kind of inward thinking. We need to outward think and get this thing out there for people in communities. So, those comments from the departments are great. Some of them I've never heard of them being in the comprehensive plan, but that's neither here nor there. I've never heard of a lot of things, but I think we've got to be careful about not being inward thinking about. It's fine to kind of estimate if you have 70,000 people now and you're going to have 140, you need twice as much staff. That is just an estimating thing, but and a lot more office space. So I know what they're thinking about, but those are kind of outputs that are responses to what you go through in a plan. So,
Thank you, that's a really good comment, and I do want to just kind of answer, what kind of comments we're gathering is exactly what you're talking about. It's more of just a small component of the larger plan. We intend to source a lot of this information in terms of how many libraries we need X population from these departments, so it will be sourced
Oh, yeah, well,
locally and kind of focused into that.
there's all kinds of ideas that come up with the libraries in the plan, and you should put a library at every middle school. That happens in some plans. Having schools and libraries merging together, and so you don't have to build facilities so many times.
I think what they're also,
Go ahead.
with some of the departments, it's not that they want to flesh out entirely what that department's going to do, but it will give them a footing for an implementation step for them to look further after the comp plan is done as a way of going back and referencing the larger plan for their planning efforts in the future. So like Helen was
Smart
saying,
thinking.
we don't see that as being a big component, but it's more of a placeholder for them to go back and say, it is a comprehensive plan, and here's how we envision fitting into that, but yes, we need to further expand on that for our department.
The main reason I was interested in this occurring was that we need to have buy-in everywhere. We need to have people, all the departments, and you know, everything buying into this whole effort, or it's not going to be effective. So, you know, we spent a month doing this. I think it was worth the time and effort to do that, even though a lot of it was inward stuff. It allowed people to become involved in the process at a very early date. You know, so I think that's important.
That's a good idea.
Go ahead.
It seems to me an adopted land use plan will actually help the departments become more efficient because they'll know where they need to put
Exactly. And if they start
additional
seeing that,
resources rather than making it totally haphazard.
if they start seeing that in an early date, they'll be more likely to become involved in it. Gene, you itching to say something?
Yeah, I was just, Hillary had mentioned that DSS, the finance department, those are still some of the departments you have to hear back from. And you mentioned Chatham County Schools. Have they gotten back to you yet, or have?
No, but our assistant county manager works very closely with the school system, so we've been working with her to kind of capture the big picture of what the broader comments are. But we are developing that conversation with the school system.
Okay, because I think that's, having attended several school board meetings, that's always a big concern of theirs, is that they're kind of, they feel, it may not be true and it may be true, but they sometimes feel that they're left out of the planning process. And since that's what, a large percentage of the total county budget, that's important. So besides those folks, who else do you need to touch base with within the next?
Sorry, I can't off the top of my head enumerate, I had my list going, but we just have a few more departments to kind of, as you can see in the scope, we've already mentioned schools, we've mentioned utilities, we've mentioned outside jurisdictions, we've kind of contemplated the entire span. So it's really just fine tuning. We need to meet with emergency operations and just make sure we've nailed down all the components of what they handle and how it affects the county-wide long-range planning process. DSS is another example. Fine-tune the conversation with Chatham County Schools and trying to figure out what other departments we've missed. Forgive me. But we have, up to this point, been very comprehensive in addressing the wide range of areas that a traditional comprehensive plan does address.
Okay. I know our attorney has left, but would a reasonable, I think that's a term they like to use, would a reasonable person feel that you're at the point where we can make a motion, or do we need to give those remaining departments another month to provide their input and then make a motion?
I'll just make a brief staff comment. As I framed this presentation, is that we have felt that the comments to date are collected and are sufficient, and what else is to be developed will not impact the scope as presented greatly.
Okay.
So you will not see much of change. The biggest change will be the fiscal impact analysis, which will be item number 12 on page 7. We look to fold in the majority of the comments I went over today into short summaries underneath that subject, so that we can gauge how this will fiscally impact the county long range.
We
So
do
there won't be
have a
substantial
motion
change.
and a second on the floor forward this.
Okay.
Any other discussion?
On page 6, it was, let's see, not page 4. Has the commissioners already decided that there will be a plan?
It's addressed as a goal, a specific goal, commissioner goal. And so in that regard, it's been a consensus with the commissioners. And then also it has been presented in the budget. So as far as commissioner discussion and objectives, it is addressed as a high objective.
Okay, because the number, on page 4 and number 3, the development of the public engagement plan, the last bullet references the grassroots approach to the development of the plan. So that means there will be a plan.
If I can just.
Or should that be a development of the plan if one is adopted or approved or whatever?
Well, the way that we kind of phrase the language in the plan is as though it is happening. So the phase 1 and phase 2, although separate, we want the phase 1 to speak kind of presently about the intention of kind of kicking it into phase 2. So the way that we wrote this, and we're open to suggestions for rewording, is that we will have the consultant do a public outreach plan that focuses specifically on a grassroots approach. We kind of wrote it in the present as though this is happening in RFP. Did that answer your question, if I may?
Any other?
I got a procedural question, and if this isn't the appropriate time, just let me know. Having worked on RFPs when I worked at Verizon, and having dealt with governments, they're very specific as to how they're written. And federal government, there's actually a whole bunch of federal rules you have to run by. If we go ahead and approve this and this goes to the commissioners, what's the next steps, and what's our involvement in any of those next steps?
Okay, I'll answer that in tag team with Jason, but once it goes into the commissioner's hands, it's in their hands, but we still don't have an approved budget with the land use plan with funding behind it. So that's the absolute next step. And of course, the recommendation from the planning board and all the work that's been done on the RFP to date. From there, if the budget is approved, the land use plan as presented, then we're able to advertise for the plan. The RFP is able to go out. And of course, this is all at the discretion of the commissioners. But again, it was a goal of the commissioners to produce this plan. So from there, we would essentially advertise at whatever date the commissioners deem necessary. And then we have the phase 1, once we collect our consultants, there'd be a selection committee, and then it just kind of rolls in from there. But absolutely, planning board is involved as part of the ongoing development of the plan. So I would imagine updates to the planning board as it moves through this process that I just explained, and then absolutely involvement once the process is kicked off.
We would be back in the loop, but the next step is for the board of commissioners to decide, one, they're gonna do something, two, they gotta follow their own process. And then if things begin to work, then they'll be reporting back, asking us for our advice.
Okay, who's gonna?
We're advisory, we don't do.
Right, who's gonna write the RFP, and is there a template that we'll be working off of?
This is our
Yes,
So it includes, as you had mentioned with the federal, and that's a good observation, we try to write this as though this will be advertised tomorrow essentially, so the commissioners have a packet ready to look at and send off if they'd like to at that moment. But the back end of it is all the procurement information and all the statutory requirements and our county policy requirements. So that kind of encapsulates the whole thing, the whole RFP. Everything except the physical advertising, which we're working with our finance department to fine tune that schedule and to just ensure that everything in here is completely compliant with the law and the county policy.
Okay.
So this is the whole package, if you will.
As you well know, having dealt with RFP, there'll be a boilerplate section that goes.
Yeah, and the thing is, if you're not specific on RFPs, there's a whole lot of wishy-washiness, and then the vendors start arguing with each other, and it just gets ugly.
It's a great comment, but we're in really good hands with our finance department.
Okay. Has this been approved? Again, I read through it, but on the budget side, has this been approved for this upcoming year's budget?
It's proposed within the budget.
Yes.
I believe there was a presentation to the board on the budget here at the meetings on Monday, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
So they are well aware of the proposal.
And when are they voting on
for the budget, I think it's wrapping up in June.
Yeah, you said June.
So July one,
Sometime in
is
June,
correct.
And we
It has
could
to be
take,
done no later than June 30.
Right.
There you
I
go.
mean, we could, the board, if they want to, they could issue the RFP prior to the budget being adopted if they want to. They just can't sign, we can't sign a budget ordinance. A sign awarding contract, but we could, if the board wants to, we could issue the RFP and start the selection process.
You want to kind of err on the side of, mandated deadlines, July 1, and the adoption of the budget, if that's in there, would be our start date.
Thankfully, we don't get involved in budget.
Right.
Yes.
So basically, we do have to vote on it tonight, because if you're talking about June 1st, that's already next month, and you would have to bring that up on the next meeting, which is in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, we need to move this.
Okay.
Any other discussion? All right.
Thank you for your
All,
comment.
all in favor of the motion of forwarding this to the Board of Commissioners? Hold your hand. 2, 4, 6, 7. 7 opposed? 1. Abstain again?
There's a lot of technical questions still.
Now, the next item of business is the report of the other subcommittee, alternative open use zoning. George?
We're way behind.
Well,